an Undertow Content podcast.
Undertow Content acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which we are recording this podcast. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people Australia-wide.
From Undertow Content, you're listening to Cut the Podcast, where we deep dive into the many facets of the entertainment industry, both locally and internationally.
We're bringing you unfiltered stories and raw insights with no gatekeeping.
We're your hosts,
Amanda Brown
and Nell Nacken. On today's show, we talk to Liam Mulligan, who is another Aussie transplant to LA and is working as a post-production supervisor on some incredible projects. But first, let's dive into In the News.
Today's In the News segment is one that we are super passionate about here at Cut and also across the broader Undertow Content team, and it's to do with the idea of being a creative entrepreneur.
Now, if we start with an article published in Variety by Rebecca Rubin, she writes, Denzel Washington and Jake Gyllenhaal will return to Broadway to interpret the Bard.
Ooh.
They will star in a revival of Shakespeare's tragedy Othello, which opens in the spring of 2025 and is sure to be one of the buzziest tickets of the season. That's spring 2025 in the US, so that means autumn 2025 for Australia.
Us, down under. It goes on to say that Kenny Leon, who is going to direct, and I believe he's currently directing Thornton Wilder's Our Town with Jim Parsons on Broadway, who is known most famously for his role as Sheldon in The Big Bang Theory. But I found this really inspiring because we talk a lot around here about what it means to have a sustainable career. And in October, we actually produced and moderated a panel at South by Southwest Sydney that focused on what this actually means.
Now, these men are all at the top of their game when it comes to successful careers in the entertainment industry. We could sit here and assume they would never have to worry about where their next job on screen is coming from. But what I love about this is that even though they don't necessarily have to do anything other than star in film and TV, they are doing theatre because they want to. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of actors out there thinking, well, I would love to do theatre, but I need to do things that will pay the bills. And that is totally fair. Valid, feelings valid. Mm-hmm. But I think what I took away from this article is that even at the height of their success, these men, and there are plenty of women too, they've diversified their income streams.
Yes. They aren't just sitting here saying, I'm going to stick to movies only, because historically there have been people who say, I'm only doing movies or I'm only doing TV.
Yeah.
There was this idea of the movie star, and I would say Denzel and Jake would fit into that category, whereas Jim is more known for his TV work. But I think that the industry has changed and, quite frankly, is demanding that actors and creatives in general should be thinking about diversifying their craft and income.
Yeah. And something we touched on in our panel is having the job that pays the bills, so you can volunteer and get experience in the field or the job that you want to then build your resume to start getting paid for that job, and hopefully be able to shift over to finding work within the field or the skills that you want to be. So Denzel Washington, I saw a clip on Graham Norton the other day, and he was talking about how he did Othello. I think he said he was 22.
Wow.
And now he's doing it again at 70, which I love. I love. And I know Jim Parsons is a big theatre person as well. So it doesn't matter what level of your career you're at. There has to be diversification. You have to diversify. There needs to be multiple streams.
Yeah.
These guys probably don't need it. They don't need to do it.
Yeah, but also, I like how you're talking about that they're deciding to do a different section of the industry. So for someone not of this A-list kind of caliber, it could be, say, an actor who goes to present something else, or they do corporate work for a while, or they learn another skill like editing, for example, and they just add another string to their bow. And we talk about this all the time. As a freelancer, it's lumpy money. You don't know when you're going to get paid. It's taking care of you so that you can then create more work, more opportunities. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And it's that whole idea around, and this is something we talked about in the panel, of volunteering. Because you want to build the resume, you want to build your experience so that you can get the jobs. And the other thing too, in terms of the creative entrepreneur, it's not just for above the line or in front of camera, it's behind the camera too. It looks different. I know a cinematographer, and he is a fantastic cinematographer who's trying to build up to get onto a feature film and a series. While he's doing that, he's a best boy gaffer on some of the big Marvel films.
Making network, learning the ropes, watching the people who are, years ahead of him do it and how they interact with whoever they need to interact. It's great.
And also being a best boy or being in a gaffer or best boy or in the lighting department will only enhance his skill as a cinematographer. Yeah. So thinking about that, it's like hair and makeup. It's like be able to do hair, makeup, special effects, stills. Like, what else can you do? We've spoken on this podcast to Ella McCay, who started, she went and did hair and makeup and she's also an actress. So I know even in acting, it's kind of like once you've been a guest star, you don't want to do it again. Or once you've been a co-star, you don't want to do it. There's levels, right? Yeah. But it's a balance. It's really a balance of the diversification of the income streams. And we've talked about that for Undertow starting the business. It's like we have to have diverse income streams because nothing is guaranteed.
Yeah. But also like operating as a business too. Like these guys have to know like what tax things are available for them, like what's a benefit of freelancing financially. And then also where else can I be investing my money to look after myself? Like for example, super in this country or 401k or whatever. Educate yourself on financial literacy because often that's not included in an arts degree.
No, not at all. And I think going back to this crossover kind of idea between theatre and screen and all this, if you're a set designer or a set builder for theatre, you can also do that for screen. It's like what else can transfer from theatre to screen and
how do I get access into those jobs?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of like with animation, they do gaming and they do, series and they do this and they do that. So I think it's the idea of the creative entrepreneur is like giving ourselves permission to diversify and like actually just have fun. Yeah. You can be a producer and you can be a writer and you can be a director, but you can also be, you can be a PA on set if you just want to get experience on
you
set.
can be a driver, you can be catering.
Exactly. Like there are so many ways to be able to do that and it's just a matter of starting. And obviously you don't want to spread yourself too thin. It's picking and choosing the jobs that are going to help you build your resume. But there's so much that we can talk about on this topic and it's exciting because we dig into this topic, the idea of the creative entrepreneur with some of our guests, which is great. We want to hear from people what they think about the ideas. Send us an email and jump into our comments because we really want to hear what you guys think and what you're struggling with and if this idea sounds good to you or the challenges that you face with this idea of diversifying, trying to do many things at once.
Yeah, because it's here to stay.
Yes, it is.
Get on board.
It has to be. Get on board.
Our expert chat today is with Liam Mulligan, another Aussie who has made the move from Castle Hill in Sydney to the bright lights of LA. Having started out as an agent in the music industry in Australia, Liam made the shift to working as an assistant in post-production. He worked his way up and over the Pacific, making the leap to LA and moving up the ranks to eventually become the executive director for Asia Pacific and Latin America post-production at 20th Century Fox. Big job. He then went over and had a stint at Netflix, then back at 20th and is now a freelance post-production supervisor, working on big budget films and making a name for himself in the industry. His knowledge is fascinating.
What is it that you do and what do you think people should know about what you do?
I'm a post-production supervisor. We're the ones that corral all the adults to do their job on budget and on time. We work mainly with editorial and producers, directors, editors, the sound teams, the DI facilities, and we manage the schedule and budget to make sure that we finish the film after production and deliver it to whichever studio we're working with.
Okay, so where did you start?
I studied music business at TAFE, New South Wales. I got my degree in music business. I thought I was going to work in marketing at a record label. I worked at an agency in Sydney for about 2 years. I absolutely hated it. It just wasn't the kind of environment that I wanted to be a part of. So my mother found a news clipping for a job at 20th Century Fox back then.
A news clipping? Wow, this is showing.
Yeah, right. I mean, I'm sure Seek existed, but my mom doesn't know how to use a computer. So she saw it and it was for the assistant of international post-production or something. I had no experience. I knew nothing. I applied for the job. I got an interview and I walked in and met with my later boss. and was honest and said, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm a quick study and I will work my ass off. And like 14 years later, I'm still in the film industry. I feel very lucky. I love film, always have. I never really thought that I could work in this industry, especially being from Australia, because it is a smaller industry there. But I've never really looked back. I love entertainment. It's great. It's hard right now with everything going on in the industry, especially in LA. I don't know if it's hit Australia or the layoffs and everything as much, but here it's a little bit dire, but it's still such a great industry, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, it is tough. I know that there are a lot of companies who are still feeling the backwash of the strikes and of COVID. It's kind of only just starting to get some rhythm again. But then on the other hand, it's good because there is a lot of production coming to Australia. It's an interesting
Good
time.
for you.
Yeah, it is good for us.
Tax incentives and currency exchange really works in your favor.
It does. It really does.
At what point did you move to the US? Was it with a job?
Yeah, so I was working at 20th Century Fox in the Asia Pacific office, and we did all the localization, so like dubbing, subtitling, censorship editing. And I was there for, I think, about 4 years, just under 3.5 years. And at the time, one of the guys that we worked with in LA had a job opening, and we were pretty good friends. And we'd had a couple of drinks when I'd come to LA in 2011. And we just kind of spitballed, like, hey, like, if it ever came up, would you be interested in moving? And I was like, yeah, of course. Like, I'd love to move to LA and work in film. And he rang me out of the blue one day and was like, hey, I think I can probably get this across the line. You'll have to move to LA. I'll promote you. And I was like, great. When do I sign? And I think from the date I signed, it was 3 weeks, and I moved to LA in 2012. And I've been here, 12 years later? I'm still here. Just got citizenship finally.
Wow. Yeah. That is like the dream for so many people.
Yeah. We'll promote you, pay you more, and you can move to LA. Okay.
Wow.
So I was very lucky. And then, like I said, I finally got citizenship like 3 weeks ago. So I guess I'm here forever.
Yeah.
So how creative is your role, or is it purely logistical?
There's a little bit of both. I think mainly it's going to be operations and logistics, moving the pieces around the board, making sure everyone's running towards the same goal, making sure everyone's staying on budget and doing everything we need them to do on time. But there is also a creative aspect when you pick a music editor, say, and sometimes that's a post-super, sometimes that's a post-executive studio, sometimes the editor has who they want to work with, sometimes producers. So there is some creativity, especially when you're on the stage or in the DI facility. But even then, it really depends on the crew that you're working with. Sometimes your input is welcome and sometimes it's not. It just depends. Every project is going to be so different. It really depends who you're working with. But you are sitting with the creatives, even if you're not being creative. So I think for me personally, that's the side that I never had. I was always studio, and this is my first time being like production or post or freelance. And I love it, sitting in the editorial offices every day, working with all those people, watching what they do and listening and learning. Like, it's great.
Okay, so at what point of the production does someone engage you?
It varies. And again, depending on the studio and the project, I think the post-executive side probably come on earlier because they're the ones that usually do the first pass of the budget with production. And they're the ones that will hire the post-super most of the time. And that could be they like working with a certain person, the director has someone again, or they've been recommended. So we usually come on, and it depends if there's someone handling dailies or not. Some studios have like a dedicated dailies person. We used to have one that was great. So he would handle that. So our post-supers never had to do it. So we would bring them on to set up. The thing that people seem to forget is editorial starts when production starts. Or usually they start a week earlier, because as soon as dailies start coming in, the editorial team are working. It's usually a skeleton crew to be your editor, and if you have a first and second or whatever assistants you have, and usually a PA, maybe a post-super. But a lot of the times, depending on the budget and whether you're handling dailies or not, the post-super will come on for a couple of non-consecutive weeks. They'll set the show up, they'll work with all the vendors, make sure the editorial is ready to go once production's finished, and then we go away for a little while they're in production, because unless we're handling dailies, there's not really a lot to be done. There'll be a few like logistical things here and there we jump in and do, but generally in production, it's kind of quiet. If you're handling dailies, it's a lot busier, so then usually you will stay on. And there's also a budget, like can they afford to have a post-super on for 10 weeks of shoot or not? A lot of the shows that I've worked on, the post-supers haven't been on just because the budgets are lower, 30 to 40 to $50 million, and they need as much money as they can for the shoot. So they'll put the post super on, set everything up, they'll go away, and then they'll come back like day one or maybe a week before production wraps to make sure editorial space and the rest of the crew are up and running and the avids are set up and everyone's happy, and away we go into post.
I love that low budget is $30 million.
Yeah.
Low budget for me. I mean, obviously there's the indie side, and that is so different. I mean, I complain when I work on a $40 million, with a $4 million post budget. I can't even imagine what you're doing with a $4 million budget and trying to figure out how much of that is post.
What would a post budget look like on a $40 million or $30 million film?
It's usually somewhere between like 5 to 8%, maybe 10% of the overall production budget. And a lot of that depends on how many assistant editors we're going to have. Do we have an additional editor? Do we have 1 or 2 music editors? How many VFX editors? Is it a VFX heavy show? Because if it is, we probably need at least a VFX editor and maybe an assistant VFX editor or a second VFX editor. And then like, who's mixing? Or who's doing the color? How many days do they need? On a show like my last one, I think we had 13 days of color. Like, is that enough? Or, if you're doing like I'm sure like a Marvel film or something where it's thousands of VFX shots and your DI is probably a lot longer. And obviously every day of DI costs money. And say with the mix, every day you're on the stage, you're spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So that's a kind of general aim, is somewhere between, I think, 5 to 8%, maybe up to 10%, depending on the budget and the show. And usually that, when I come on, I've noticed most of the time, the studio exec has kind of already worked on the budget and it might be like somewhat locked. You can go through and be like, well, I think maybe we need a little bit here or we need a little bit less here. But most of the time they've already done that. We kind of walk in and then we take over and run from there with, we need Evercast now. Our director's going to be overseas, so he wants to work on Evercast, which is like a Zoom that's made to work for editorial. So that's another, $800 a month that we didn't budget. Where's that money coming from? Or can we add that to the budget before we lock? Stuff like that.
Yeah, so interesting. So fascinating. No, but it is. I think I really do think it is, because there's so many people, they don't know about post. They don't know the whole process. I definitely didn't.
Magic. It just happens. We'll fix it in post,
Yeah. How much is virtual production part of what you do?
Not really at all, to be honest. I mean, other than I think for VFX, they'd probably be affected more by virtual production, because I think it'll help them save or figure out what shots they need to get. But for us in post, other than the VFX impact, there's not a lot. And usually we have a VFX producer, again, depending on your budget, we have a VFX producer, a VFX super, and maybe a VFX coordinator, and they're usually the ones working with all the vendors, and they'll go out and sit on set and make sure we're getting plates and other things that we need to complete whatever VFX shots they know going in. But VFX, whatever they budget, however many shots, you triple it, and that's probably close to how many you're going to have. On my last shot, I think we were at 300 and something that they budgeted, and I think we ended up at 800 or something like that, just because beauty fixes and we couldn't get this on the day because the lighting wasn't right, or we just didn't have time, so now you need to do a visual effects, or it's a lot of that kind of stuff. Or whoops, there's a boom in this shot that we didn't see, so we need to paint it out.
Yeah, hence why every budget should have a contingency. Okay, so what are some typical challenges or problems that you solve?
Money.
Right.
Need more money, need more time.
How do you do that?
I think everyone pads budgets a little bit, so there'll be pads here and there that you can pull from. There will be leftovers from production that's like, okay, can we move this above the line? Car travel to below the line, because we know we're going to preview in Phoenix or something, so we know we need to do travel. So you can pull money like that. If there's a real money issue, that's a conversation between the post accountant, the post super, the post exec, and the studio finance team. And it's just can we get more money from the contingencies? Do we have any money? If not, okay, then we need to really figure out how to tighten the budget, which obviously no creatives ever want to do, but sometimes you have to rob Peter to pay Paul kind of thing. And then the other one's time. It's they never want to deliver when they need to deliver, right? The studio on the film usually gives them, I think it's 10 weeks director's cut, and sometimes directors are ready and sometimes they want more time. You have to have those conversations. A lot of what we do is just negotiating between different people, how to get what we need and make sure everyone's as happy as they can be, because you can never make everyone happy. But a little bit more like a line producer, where it's kind of our job to say no or to figure out creative solutions. we try never to say no if you don't have to, but figure out that creative solution to get that.
How do you do that?
I think within our
Where's that money come from?
borrow, and steal. Because you can't just say no because then no one wants to work with you, unfortunately. But having hard conversations is definitely part of the job. It's horrible. And if you don't like conflict, I don't know if post supervising is necessarily for you. For me, I've found you have to have hard conversations with people that don't necessarily want to hear it. That's the hardest part of the job, is just sometimes the conversations you have to have, because you're going to upset someone, and someone's not going to be pleased with the answer you give, but you do the best you can and you figure out if there is a creative solution, how to do it, and present all the kind of options and then pick the best one and move forward. Because of the politics, sometimes it's just like, okay, well, I'm going to ring my creative exec, and they ring the creative exec, and then somehow some money is found, and it's like, okay, we can do this now.
Okay, so on the other hand, what's the most satisfying part of your job?
When I was at Netflix, I used to work on the screenings team, and we handled all the production side of screenings, basically. So we'd go in and tech check the rooms and work with the vendors, make sure everything looks and sounds as good as possible for like premieres, festivals, award screenings, you name it. And I think one of the coolest things we did was down in Argentina. We built a theater inside this like beautiful university debate hall, and we played the movie The Two Popes. I think that was like one of the most satisfying things, just walking in and being like, oh my God, we've got 4 days to turn this into a theater. On the post side, I think just being able to come up with those creative solutions and making people happy is the best gratification I've had. Getting through a project is pretty satisfying. It's sad at the end. Like, I hate saying goodbye to the team. You build those kind of families and relationships, and then 9-12 months later, you're like, oh, see ya, maybe we'll work together again, maybe we won't. I think that's the hardest thing I've found about this world. Rather than at the studio, you're stuck with the same people for as long as you're at the studio.
Yeah.
For better or worse. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. But you see someone every day for 9 months, and then suddenly it's like, oh, I haven't spoken to them in like 4 months. I wonder how they're doing.
Post is like when you say goodbye in post, like you say goodbye because that's like the end of the project. And we were speaking to someone the other day who said so many people don't finish their project, which is why I think your role is so important, because you get the project finished. And there are so many people who get to that point, like especially creatives or whatever, the creatives get to the post side and they're so exhausted, and it's this and it's that. And the producers too. So your role is so crucial in getting it finished.
And I think that's different on film and series as well. I think the series workflows are different. I think on our side, most of the producers stay very involved just because they want that produced by those PGA marks if it's going to be Oscar eligible. So they have to be involved. I mean, series is different. They have post producers. We don't really have those on film. There's some post supers that have been doing it long enough, or that have been lucky enough to become producers. There's one that works on Stranger Things. He post produced a bunch of Sean Levy's films, and now he's a producer on Stranger Things. Those kind of relationships exist as well, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's great.
I think on the series side, they do get to stick with the teams a little bit more. Like, a lot of the time, the same crews will come back for seasons 2, 3, 4. There'll be changes, but generally it's the core teams. Like on Stranger Things, our music editor just left because she was on the last season, and they just called her and was like, hey, we need you back for the next season. And she's like, oh, sorry guys, I gotta jump. And I was like, I don't blame you. Like, that's really cool. And she won an Emmy, so why wouldn't she?
So what trends are you noticing in the industry that are post specific?
Trends in the industry overall is all the layoffs. I know a lot of people, unfortunately, that have been affected recently, and that's both at the studios, and I think that trickles down into the freelance world as well. That's unfortunately the biggest trend right now, is just people looking for work, because I think the studios and networks and everyone else have reduced the amount of content that they're making. And obviously 3 years ago, there was so much content that you're batting it away and no one could work on as many projects as they're offered. And now it's like, oh, people are begging and fighting over the few projects there are. So hopefully, now that the strikes are in the past for at least for a couple more years, I think the other thing that hurts overall is just all the consolidation right now. There's a lot of studios merging, and I think that unfortunately means less content as well. On the post side, there's always emerging technology. A few years ago, we didn't have Dolby Cinema. Now, Dolby Cinema has become pretty prevalent. What's the next thing? Obviously, AI is on the horizon. And I think on the post side, there's so many aspects and ways that it can be used. mixing, DI, plugins for Avid, plugins for Pro Tools. Obviously on the international side, like dubbing, there's so many new applications that I think that on my side, it's you just have to keeping up with all the technology that's coming out. When I was at Netflix, I'd never worked on anything other than like a digital cinema projection when you're in a theater. And then we were working with QuickTimes and ProReses and so many other different things with different needs, because suddenly we're doing premieres for series that may never have premiered previously. You know, films were always the ones you saw in a theater, and now suddenly we're doing big series premieres in theaters. Or like even when I was there, they were looking at the LED walls. So it's basically like a giant TV screen. But the issue with that at the time was that you couldn't have the audio come through the screen like you would in a cinema. So someone had to come up with a way. One of the companies came up with an algorithm that can now bounce the sound through an auditorium. So you can't really tell that it's not coming from like the left, center, right. So that's, I think, the biggest trend in my side is just like trying to keep up with all the new technology. On the film I'm on now, there was that the trailer for the new Tom Hanks film where it's all set in the same house or room or something. And they used literally an AI VFX algorithm to de-age everyone. We looked into it, and then we did some tests with some actors and other people, and which is the way to go? Who knows? Because today it's one way, and in 6 months' time, and that's going to be antiquated, and we're going to be going in a different direction. That's kind of cool, but scary as well, obviously.
Yeah. It's good, but it's bad, but it's good. It's like a double-edged sword.
I think it's great, and I think it'll complement the industry in ways that people haven't imagined. And hopefully it won't impact people as much as everyone is scared of it. I think if you can embrace it and learn to use it, I think it'll really help.
Yeah, I agree.
Or it'll be Skynet and kill us all. So it can go either way.
The robots will get us.
Yeah, they're coming.
No, I still haven't used ChatGPT. I'm like, I ain't going to be the one that causes Skynet to become sentient.
Yeah. Oh. Okay, what is a film that has influenced you?
Anything like 80s, 90s, Jurassic Park, Star Wars, The Goonies, anything John Hughes. People will ask me what's your favorite film. I always say The Goonies. I remember growing up, like the adventure and the fun. I loved June 2 recently. I thought that was a brilliant film. You know, sitting there in that, I think we saw it in IMAX, sitting there in the IMAX theater, and the whole thing is rumbling. Like, that's really cool. And that makes me want to get up in the morning and work in this industry. And even on the worst day, there's days that I'm like, I hate this industry and I want to leave. Then I remind myself, like, oh, I'm getting paid to work on films. This is the dream. What am I complaining about? On this film, I actually went out to Rhode Island and set up. We sent Avids out to Rhode Island, and our editor and first actually were on set. And literally, like, they have Avids in their hotel rooms, but they're also on set. So that was really cool because, like, I don't generally get to go and see them shoot. So it's kind of exciting for a day. On Quiz Lady, which was another film I worked on, I got to go and sit there and watch them record the kind of end game show, and that was really fun to watch. It's more like sitting in those either premieres or the previews and listening to the audience laugh and interact with the film. I think that's really cool and gratifying.
It's true. It's like when it gets outside your world and it goes into someone else's world and they enjoy it, it's like so satisfying.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how creatives do it, because it's like, that's your little baby and you're putting it out there. I mean, before I worked on the post side, I was so naive to the emotion and the attachment to some of the projects, because it's easy to judge when you don't really have that. You just sit back and you're like, oh, this film.
Yeah.
But like, once you work on a film and you're like, oh, like I've spent hundreds or thousands of hours on this film working, it's such a different experience. And you know, even for me, it's not my baby. I come onto someone else's baby. And so like, sometimes I can be a little bit more removed. And if you preview and it's not the best score, it's like, oh, well, like we can fix things. But I can't imagine how that must feel when like, that is your baby that someone is sitting there giving honest feedback about. And I commend anyone that can do that. That takes guts. I don't think I could do that.
What's your superpower?
I work well in chaos. I mean, if I could have a real one, it'd probably be flying, or like being able to breathe underwater, or invisibility or something. But like, I think I just thrive under chaos. So, you know, I had that 30-second freak out, and then I just put my head down and figure out the solution. I've always been that way, for better or worse, because it's not nice to work in that chaos. It happens a lot in this industry. It's just like trying to figure out, how can we get through this, and how can we make sure everyone's happy, or what does it even take? I remember there was one years and years ago, we had an issue with a film in India that they got a last minute censor edit request, and I think we were releasing in 2 or 3 days. And I was like, holy, how are we going to do this? I remember having a freak out for about 5 minutes, and I just sat down. I'm like, we have to figure this out. And it's just like, go, 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 go. So I think I do really well under pressure. I might not be the nicest person under pressure, or I might not react we're showing, we're a little blunt sometimes. And I think that I found that really hard when I moved here, was just being a shine in the US. I think that the cultures aren't that similar on the inside, if that makes sense. Like from the outside, it looks like the cultures are, but they're not. I think there is an inherent abrasive honesty with Australians, and I don't think that really suits the business world here very well. So I did get into some conflicts when I first moved here, because I would just say what I was thinking and people wouldn't take it the same as like when you say it in Australia. And it took me a while to figure it out. I'm like, oh, like I have to sandwich this between a compliment, compliment, feedback, compliment.
Yeah.
And that's how I deliver it. But half the time no one hears the feedback, they hear the compliment. Yeah, there was a few arguments I got into when I moved here that I was just like, looking back, I'm like, oh, if I just understood even a little bit, I would have been fine.
Last question. What's one bit of advice that will actually help our listeners move their career forward?
I don't want to say anything cliche because I'm not sappy like that, but believe in yourself. If you really want to work in this industry, find a way. There is an industry in Australia. The way that I did it, I was lucky, but get your foot in the door down there and learn those skills and make the contacts. Unfortunately, unless you win the green card lottery or you have US parent or something, it's so hard to come across here. But get your foot in the door down there, because you never know what opportunities that's going to allow, and network. I mean, if it wasn't for me networking, I never would be where I am now. Network, and try to remain as positive as you can, because it could take a while. You could get really lucky, or it may never happen, and that's okay too. Just give it all. Try as much as you can and figure out what you can do.
And how do you network?
That's a great question. I think depending on what you want to do, I think there are film schools and film programs out there that you could do. And those will obviously, if you go into those, you have all your classmates. And I mean, there's so many people I work with in LA that are like, oh, I went to Chapman with this person, or I went to UCLA or NYU or whatever film school it is. I mean, the PA I have now, I got from my first assistant editor, because I was like, hey, do you know any Chapman grads that are looking for jobs that want to be editors eventually? Well, I can't give them an apprentice editor job, but I can give them a PA and they can learn. So it's that kind of thing. I think it's probably a little harder there just because the industry is a little smaller, but there's always productions and independent productions, and just go find people online that have similar interests. There's probably some kind of like production job site in Australia, or if not, maybe someone will build one.
Crew HQ.
Yeah, Crew HQ. There you go. And reach out to people. Hit people up on LinkedIn. I get people hitting me up all the time on LinkedIn, and I'm not always the best at replying, but there's definitely people that I'm like, oh, okay, like so-and-so recommended me. Or there was a young lady that's a post-PA, post-quad that reached out of the blue, and I knew some post-supers she worked with, so I replied. And then I reached out to them, and I was like, hey, like, how was this person? Like, oh, she's great. Like, you should meet with her. So I couldn't offer her a job at the time, but I forwarded a resume on, and I think one of my friends had a show that needed someone, so they hired her. So it's that kind of thing. Just like use your network any way you can. Anyone you meet, just stay in contact with. How to contact me? I guess LinkedIn is the easiest. Tell me who you are, what you're interested in. I can give you some advice. Maybe it's helpful, maybe it's not. Everyone's different. Every situation is different. And what worked for me might not work for someone else. But there's a million ways to get to where you want to be. And you just have to keep believing and pushing through and making sure you're walking in the right direction. I mean, for me personally, when I left Netflix, I took a step back. I really wanted to be in post. And I knew that for me to be in post, I had to take that step back to take 2 steps forward. If I didn't do that, I probably never would have been able to be in post, because unfortunately, even though I'd worked around post, I didn't have the post experience that people wanted for the jobs that they're hiring for. So I took a step back and became a post coordinator. The person I was working with is brilliant, and she was a professor and she teaches, and she taught me everything she knew, and she was willing to do that. So I was very lucky. I mean, my first job at 20th in Sydney, like I said, I looked at the lady at the time and said, I'll learn and I'll work my ass off and just teach me everything you can. And she appreciated that, and she did, and I learned everything I could. You know, for me personally, there's no job too small. I'll still go out and pick up lunches if I need to. Just be willing to work and do anything that needs to be done. And I think people respect you and will want to work with you again and will help you grow.
Fascinating.
I think post-production is quite a myth for so many people, and the info Liam gave us was so easy to digest. I feel like there are many things that happen in post that no one knows. So thank you, Liam. We appreciate you.
Love it. We're done talking for now, but we want to hear from you. Get in touch with us over on our website, undertowcontent.com, the home of the podcast, or slide into our DMs on socials at cut.pod and let us know who or what you want to hear on the show.
Thank you so much for stuffing us in your ears. In our next episode, we chat to Australian actress Alison McCay. Trust us, you do not want to miss this one. Remember to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and see you next time.
See you next time.
Cut is an Undertow Content podcast. Your hosts are Amanda Brown and Nell Nacken. Music composed by Genevieve Patrick, produced by Meg Hipwell and Ali Aitken.